Today we will talk about American presidential elections. And for the purpose of talking about this, I will invite Professor G. Search. I hope you will like it.
Hello viewers, I am Professor G. Search. In today's video, we will briefly recap the first 59 American presidential elections. The first and second American presidential elections were held in 1788 and 1792 respectively. They had one thing in common. George Washington won these elections unopposed. The first contested American presidential election was in fact the third American presidential election held in 1796, when Federalist Party's candidate John Adams was able to defeat the Democratic Republican Party's candidate Thomas Jefferson by an electoral vote margin of 71 to 68, illustrating that close presidential elections are not a modern-day phenomenon in American politics. Thomas Jefferson won his rematch against John Adams in 1800 when he won by a 73 to 65 electoral vote margin. Thomas Jefferson's second presidential election victory in 1804 was much more comprehensive when he defeated Charles Spotswood Pinckney with an electoral vote margin of 162 to 14. Charles Spotswood Pinckney once again lost the presidential election in the following cycle in 1808. This time, the winner was James Madison, who won by a margin of 122 to 47 in the Electoral College. James Madison was able to win a second term in 1812 by defeating David Clinton, no relation to Bill Clinton, by a margin of 128 to 89 in the Electoral College. In 1816, arguably the most popular American president, James Monroe, defeated Rufus King and did such a great job that this period in American history came to be known as the era of good feelings. James Monroe was so popular that he was re-elected American president unopposed in 1820, as no one was willing to run against him. Imagine that. 1824 marked the first controversial American presidential elections, which was ultimately won by John Quincy Adams, son of ex-president John Adams, becoming thereby the OG Nepo baby. A feat repeated 176 years later by George W. Bush in yet another controversial presidential election in the year 2000. 1824 presidential election deserves a separate YouTube video for itself, so we will discuss this in greater detail later on. 1824 marked the emergence of a disruptive political figure, Andrew Jackson. Andrew Jackson became the first Democratic Party candidate to win the presidential election in 1828 when he defeated John Quincy Adams 178 to 83 in the Electoral College. This marked the end of the 28-year streak of Democratic Republican Party candidates becoming presidents of the United States of America, right from the time of Thomas Jefferson's victory in 1800. Andrew Jackson won a second presidential term in 1832 when he emerged victorious in yet another four-way fight for the presidency reminiscent of 1824. A four-way fight for the American presidency in 1832 was followed by a five-way fight for the American presidency in 1836, when Martin Van Buren emerged victorious to become the eighth president of the United States of America. In 1840, Whig Party candidate William Henry Harrison defeated sitting president Martin Van Buren 234 to 60 in the Electoral College, but sadly died only a month after taking office due to illness. He was therefore the first president of America to die in office and was immediately succeeded by his vice president John Tyler, who turned out to be more of an independent or a Democrat than he was a Whig Party candidate. Thus, he was expelled from his own party, the Whig Party, while serving as president, and after George Washington, John Tyler remains the only quote-unquote independent president of the United States of America. Note how every presidential election in America is held at an interval of 4 years. There is no disruption. Even events like assassination of the president does not put a spanner in the works. The Democratic Party was able to reclaim the presidency in 1844 when James K. Polk defeated Whig Party candidate Henry Clay 170 to 105 in the Electoral College. James K. Polk won the Mexican-American War but kept his pre-election pledge of serving only one term and did not run for re-election to the office of the President of the United States of America. Imagine that, keeping a pledge to not run for re-election. 1848, when Zachary Taylor won the presidential elections by defeating Louis Cass and Martin Van Buren, but like the previous Whig Party candidate to become president, Zachary Taylor also died in office due to a stomach disease. He was succeeded by his vice president Millard Fillmore, who became the last Whig Party candidate to become president of the USA. Whig Party broke up after Fillmore's presidency, and Fillmore himself joined the American Party or the Native American Party, which was often referred to as the Know-Nothings, because its party members were required to say, "I know nothing," whenever they were asked any question about the specifics of their political policies. 1852 and 1856 marked the electoral victory of the fourth and fifth Democratic Party candidates to become American presidents, Franklin Pierce and James Buchanan, respectively. Franklin Pierce served only one term as president because he failed to win his party's nomination to run for re-election in 1856. James Buchanan served only one term because he was adamant not to seek re-election. James Buchanan remains the only lifelong bachelor to serve as president of the United States of America. 5 Democratic Party candidates had already become presidents by 1860, and out of them only Andrew Jackson had been re-elected to serve 2 consecutive terms as president of the United States of America. The first Republican Party candidate to become president of the United States of America was Abraham Lincoln in 1860. The 1860 presidential elections had 4 major candidates: Abraham Lincoln, John C. Breckinridge, John Bell, and Stephen A. Douglas. So it was a controversial election that was followed by secession and then civil war. Abraham Lincoln was re-elected for a second term as American president in 1864 when he defeated George B. McClellan. His second term, however, was cut short prematurely because Lincoln became the first American president to be assassinated. Abraham Lincoln was succeeded by his vice president Andrew Johnson, who was also the first American president to be impeached. Andrew Johnson failed to win the Democratic Party's nomination. Remember, he was elected vice president as a Republican, but he tried to win the Democratic Party's nomination in 1868. He failed to do so, so he did not run for re-election. Back then, getting impeached did not make a president more popular. Imagine that. In 1868, Ulysses S. Grant ran on the Republican Party ticket and became the 18th president of the United States of America by defeating Horatio Seymour. Grant was re-elected in 1872 when he defeated Horace Greeley of the Liberal Republican Party. 1876 was perhaps the most controversial presidential election in American history, where Republican Party's candidate Rutherford B. Hayes became president by defeating Samuel Tilden by an electoral vote margin of 185 to 184. Hayes was the third president after Polk and Buchanan who kept his pre-election pledge of not running for re-election. The Republican Party was able to maintain their stranglehold on the presidency that they had won at the time of Lincoln in 1860 by winning the presidential elections in 1880 when James A. Garfield defeated Winfield Scott Hancock. Garfield was the second American president to be unfortunately assassinated. He was succeeded by Chester A. Arthur, who retired due to poor health at the end of his term in office in 1884. In 1884, Democratic Party once again won the presidency when Grover Cleveland narrowly defeated James G. Blaine 219 to 182 in the Electoral College. Grover Cleveland is relevant now because he also lost his re-election in 1888 when he was defeated by Benjamin Harrison, but won his second presidential term in 1892 when he defeated Benjamin Harrison and James B. Weaver. Thus, Grover Cleveland was the first American president to serve two non-consecutive terms in office. The second person to do so will be Donald J. Trump. In 1896 and 1900, William McKinley defeated serial presidential election runner-up William Jennings Bryan, 271 to 176 and 292 to 155 in the Electoral College, respectively. McKinley was the third US president to be assassinated, unfortunately, and was replaced by his vice president Theodore Roosevelt in 1901. Theodore Roosevelt kept the Republican Party in the White House by defeating Alton B. Parker in 1904, 336 to 140 in the Electoral College, becoming the first American president to cross 300 in the Electoral College. Theodore Roosevelt honored his promise to not seek re-election in 1908, which would have marked his third term as President of the United States of America, a promise he would break in 1912. Instead, the Republican Party candidate in 1908 was William Howard Taft, who comfortably defeated William Jennings Bryan, marking the third and last presidential election defeat of William Jennings Bryan. 1912 was yet another controversial presidential election where factions of the Republican Party collided against each other. They were led on one side by former President Theodore Roosevelt and on the other by incumbent President William Howard Taft. Owing to Theodore Roosevelt's third-party bid for the presidency where he publicly went against his own successor, the Republican Party lost the presidency and Democrat Woodrow Wilson became the 28th president of the United States of America, the first Democrat to become president after 4 consecutive election victories by the Republican candidates. Woodrow Wilson won his second term narrowly in the presidential elections of 1916 when he defeated Charles Evans Hughes 277 to 254 in the Electoral College, becoming only the second Democratic candidate after Andrew Jackson to serve a second consecutive term as president of the United States of America. In 1920, Warren G. Harding secured the presidency again for the Republican Party by winning a landslide victory against James M. Cox when he won by a margin of 404 to 127 in the Electoral College. Warren G. Harding sadly died in office in 1923 due to a heart attack and was succeeded immediately by his vice president Calvin Coolidge, who himself won the presidential election in a 3-way fight in 1924. Calvin Coolidge declined to seek re-election in 1928, remarking that 10 years as president would be, quote, longer than any other man has had it, too long, unquote. In 1928, in yet another landslide victory, Republican Party's Herbert Hoover defeated Al Smith 444 to 87 in the Electoral College. Herbert Hoover was widely popular. An even bigger landslide, however, marked the defeat of Herbert Hoover in the presidential elections of 1932, which were held in the backdrop of the Great Depression, when he lost by a margin of 59 to 472 in the Electoral College to Franklin Delano Roosevelt, a Democratic Party candidate who would go on to win 4 successive presidential elections between 1932 and 1944. In 1936, Roosevelt defeated Alf Landon by an even bigger margin of 523 to 8 in the Electoral College. In 1940, Roosevelt defeated Wendell Willkie 449 to 82 in the Electoral College. In 1944, Roosevelt defeated Thomas E. Dewey 432 to 99 in the Electoral College and died sadly due to illness in 1945 and was succeeded immediately by his vice president Harry S. Truman. Franklin D. Roosevelt's unprecedented 4 consecutive victories in the presidential elections led to the ratification of the 22nd Amendment, which now prohibits more than 2 terms for any American president. Harry S. Truman defeated Thomas E. Dewey in the elections of 1948 when many political commentators had literally written him off. That is Truman himself smiling in the pic. In 1952, the Republican Party was able to win back the White House for the first time since 1932 when war hero Dwight D. Eisenhower defeated Adlai Stevenson II 442 to 89 in the Electoral College. Eisenhower won re-election in 1956 when he again defeated Adlai Stevenson II, this time by an even bigger margin of 457 to 73 in the Electoral College. In 1960, Eisenhower's Vice President Richard Nixon narrowly lost the presidential election to the 43-year-old Democratic candidate for President John Fitzgerald Kennedy. 303 to 219 in the Electoral College, but a 49.72% to 49.55% margin in the popular vote. JFK sadly was assassinated in 1963, marking the most recent instance of an American presidential assassination. JFK was replaced by his Vice President Lyndon Baines Johnson, LBJ, who won the presidential elections of 1964 against Barry Goldwater in a landslide victory, 486 to 52 in the Electoral College. Lyndon Johnson did not run for re-election in 1968, making him the second most recent American president to do so, the most recent being the current American president, Joe Biden. The 1968 presidential election was the mirror opposite of the 1912 presidential election. In 1968, infighting within the Democratic Party helped Richard Nixon from the Republican Party win the presidency. Richard Nixon was able to win re-election in 1972 in a landslide victory against George McGovern. Richard Nixon won a whopping 49 out of the 50 states in the United States of America, an electoral college margin of 520 to 17. This incredibly popular president had to resign in disgrace, however, after the Watergate scandal, a scandal so epic that almost every subsequent political scandal has the suffix "gate" when people describe it. Nixon was not replaced by his original vice president, however, because his original vice president, Spiro Agnew, had himself resigned previously due to a different scandal unrelated to the Watergate scandal. And Spiro Agnew had been replaced by Richard Nixon with the House Republican leader Gerald Ford. Gerald Ford was the second vice president in Nixon's second presidential administration. It was Gerald Ford who replaced Richard Nixon as President of the United States of America, and Gerald Ford also pardoned Richard Nixon. Amidst all this political turmoil in 1976, Gerald Ford lost the presidential elections to Democratic challenger Jimmy Carter 240 to 297 in the Electoral College. In 1980, yet another landslide victory happened when Republican presidential candidate Ronald Reagan defeated incumbent Democratic President Jimmy Carter 489 to 49 in the Electoral College. Even this huge margin was improved by Ronald Reagan in his re-election bid in 1984, when, like Richard Nixon, Ronald Reagan also carried 49 out of the 50 states when he defeated Walter Mondale 525 to 13 in the Electoral College, illustrating just how popular Ronald Reagan really was. In 1988, Reagan's Vice President George Herbert Walker Bush defeated Michael Dukakis 426 to 111 in the Electoral College. In 1992, the incumbent President George H.W. Bush was defeated by 46-year-old Bill Clinton, no relation to Dewitt Clinton, 370 to 189 in the Electoral College, but this election also had Ross Perot running as an independent who was able to win 18.9% of the popular vote, illustrating once again the spoiler effect generated when there are more than two formidable candidates running for the presidency. In 1996, Bill Clinton defeated Bob Dole 379 to 159 in the Electoral College, thereby becoming only the first Democrat to win re-election since Franklin Delano Roosevelt. And in his second term in office, Bill Clinton also became the second American president to be impeached since Andrew Johnson. In 2000, perhaps the most controversial presidential election took place when George W. Bush, son of former President George H.W. Bush and brother of the then Florida Governor Jeb Bush, defeated the incumbent Vice President Al Gore 271 to 266 in the Electoral College, a verdict that was so close that it needed the intervention of the Supreme Court of the United States of America to decide it. In 2004, George W. Bush won his re-election bid by defeating Democratic challenger John Kerry 286 to 251 in the Electoral College. In 2008, America elected its first African American president when Democratic candidate Barack Obama defeated John McCain 365 to 173 in the Electoral College. Barack Obama was re-elected to office in 2012 when he defeated Mitt Romney 332 to 236 in the Electoral College. In 2016, the first person to have never held public office and who had never had any military experience was elected as president, when successful businessman and star of the popular television show The Apprentice, Donald Trump, ran and won as a Republican candidate against Democratic Party nominee Hillary Clinton. Hillary Clinton, of course, is the wife of former President Bill Clinton. Till 2016, American presidents were either politicians or generals, never admirals, interestingly. Donald Trump defeated Hillary Clinton 304 to 227 in the Electoral College. On 2020, incumbent President Donald Trump lost against former Vice President Joe Biden 232 to 306 in the Electoral College. In the recently concluded presidential elections in America in 2024, Donald Trump only became the second person in American history, the first being Grover Cleveland, to win a second non-consecutive term as President of the United States of America, when he defeated the incumbent Vice President Kamala Harris. The final figures are not in yet, but all trends indicate Trump would once again secure more than 300 Electoral College votes. I hope you like this history lesson from Professor G Search. We had a look back at the 59 presidential elections in the United States of America. The most interesting fact is that every election was held at an interval of 4 years. No weather event, no natural disaster, no war, no assassination, no turmoil led to a deviation from this quadrennial event. One of the most important reasons for a flourishing economy is stability. And for stability, you need a stable transfer of power, and a stable time period for which a single administration should stay in power. Let's throw this back to Pushpen Das Gupta now.
Thank you, Professor G Search, for that extensive discussion on every single American presidential election till 2024, and I hope you learned lots of valuable new things from watching this video. Take care, bye bye, and please don't forget to be awesome.